Well, good morning, everyone. Welcome to this morning's study. And we're going to continue dealing with the lines that we have been constructing regarding the last 7 kings of Judah. Exactly where we're going to go today, I'm not certain. But let's open once again with a word of prayer. Dear Father in heaven, we invite once again your presence as we open your word. We know, Lord, that we need your guidance. We have been studying and trying to understand this chronology and the significance for us today. And so we need your Holy Spirit to speak to us, to guide and direct in the study, and to help us to see the things that you want us to see. We pray for one another, for our families, and we ask, Lord, that you can be with each one of them. Help us in the things that we study, that we can be a help to those around us. And we pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.
Is this a new series?
No. Well, so a new series, no, this is not a new series. We're still continuing with the chronology of the kings of Judah.
Okay.
On Sabbath, yeah, and that's one thing we have to figure out what we're going to do on Sabbath as far as the 10 o'clock meeting. I haven't even thought about it really, but we can talk about that at some point. But for now, what we have done is we've gone through this chronology of the kings of Judah, the last 7 kings of Judah, and dealing with the relationship between those 7 kings and the 4 events. So just a quick summary. Back in 2013, Jeff is going to present in Alberta in August. The last week of August, he's going to be presenting the progressive destruction of 4. He just calls it the number 4. And he's going to deal with the 4 events from Leviticus 26 in the context of the last 7 kings of Judah. And I'm going to present the 4 7 times, though at that time I have not worked out all of the chronology of each of the periods, because those 4 7 times, each of those events, the captivity of Manasseh, the captivity of Daniel, the captivity of Jehoiachin, along with Ezekiel, and the captivity of Zedekiah are the 4 events in Leviticus 26. And they end with the 3 decrees that commence the 2300 days. So the 220 years are stitched together to the 220 years are stitched together to the 2300 days with the 3 decrees. And this is something that Adventists have missed. One is they will look at the decree of Artaxerxes as the decree, right? But we know all 3 decrees are needed. So when we look at those decrees, let me see here, if I can find this quickly. Well, this probably does as good a job as any of this diagram. Right, so the fulfillments of the 70 years. So back in 2013, I hadn't worked out all of this chronology yet. I was still trying to understand, based upon all of the conflicting opinions about when the Babylonian captivity began, when was the temple destroyed, was it 586 or 587, exactly when was Jehoiachin's captivity, when was Darius's decree, when was Cyrus's decree. I didn't know any of that in 2013. I did know Manasseh's captivity, and I did know 457 for the start of the 2300 days. So I knew there was 220 years in there. And then as I worked through that chronology painstakingly, by 2014, I'd come to recognize these particular dates. Now, it wasn't as refined as it was later on, because later on, when I worked through Ezekiel particularly, that's going to bring, and that's going to be in 2016, that I worked through the chronology of Ezekiel while I'm at the School of the Prophets. And Stephen is there. Heidi and I are there. Stephen's there, and Michael Chapman. And so I have discussions with Michael Chapman about that, and he brings arguments against the positions that I'm bringing, and that helps refine that. So that's where I'm going to have the dream where I'm shown that Ezekiel has two different counts. That is, he's going to count spring to spring for Zedekiah and fall to fall for Jehoiachin's captivity. So that helps refine that. And then on July 16th, I'm going to do a presentation at the School of the Prophets instead of Lambert, because Lambert's closed because the power was taken out a few days before. So that presentation that I do on Ezekiel, showing that Ezekiel, the 391 and a half years of Ezekiel, is tied to Josiah Litch's prophecy of the 391 years and 15 days. And that's where I show the prophecy of Josiah, right? So that happens in 2016. But this is an earlier chart that I had done. So it still is correct. Now, what we have is these three decrees ending the periods that we see from Leviticus 26. Now, what we're specifically studying and what we put on the line is this next slide. And in this line here, we have these events that we have marked with the Waymarks from Millerite history. So we have a period of darkness. Now, the period of darkness is this 65 years from 742 BC to 677 BC to Manasseh, who is, when he's 33 years old, is going to be converted. Now, he's a type of Christ. So his conversion being when he's 33 kind of makes sense, because Jesus is crucified when he's 33. Now, the 65 years, of course, we know is divided into the 19 years and the 46 years. So we could even make an argument that, there's really, two time periods, so to speak. But specifically, the prophecy in Isaiah 7 is talking about the 65 years when the land is forsaken of both her kings. So 19 years later, the land is forsaken when Hoshea is taken captive, 2 years before the destruction of Samaria, and then in 677 when Manasseh is taken captive. Now, Manasseh's conversion then marks the arrival of the first angel. So the darkness, whenever we look at a reform line, we have a period of darkness. Now, the darkness, of course, would be the darkness of this apostasy. But we know that a reform line is addressing that darkness. And so we would have to think about what particularly what is unfolding in these events. Now, Josiah is going to begin this period of reform. So we could see that Manasseh, or we could say it's a formalization. So Manasseh has a personal conversion, which causes him to, do some things within Jerusalem as far as removing, the different images and so forth that he had put in place and that had been put in place by others. Then when he dies, his son Ammon, who's been unchanged by his dad's conversion, even though his dad is converted before he's born, because we see that, and we didn't put that in here, but when we looked at the age of Ammon, he's obviously born after, quite a bit after Manasseh's captivity. So Ammon's rules for 2 years. And then we have Josiah. Now, Josiah, when he's 21, that's when Jeremiah begins his ministry. That's the 13th year of Josiah. So Josiah's 8 when he begins to reign. And then in his 13th year, Jeremiah begins his ministry as a prophet. And so we just have there Josiah's age being 21. Now, 5 years later, they're going to find the scroll when they're cleaning out the temple, and they're going to have a Passover. So that Passover in 622 BC, it becomes a symbol. But here we're having it as the empowerment of the first angel. So we have Manasseh's conversion is the arrival, the fulfillment of the prophecy of Josiah that happens in the 13th year is there as well, plus Jeremiah beginning his ministry, is the formalization of this message. And then it's empowered at Josiah's Passover. Now, we're going to have all of this reform, but with the battle of on the plains of Megiddo there, where Josiah is going to be killed with that stray arrow when he goes to fight against Egypt, which would be in the support of Babylon, because Babylon is fighting against Assyria. Egypt is siding with Assyria, which seems kind of odd because, Assyria and Egypt had been fighting over the territory of the Levant. But with the rise of Babylon, the enemy of my enemy is my friend, or whatever it is, whatever the saying is, they combine together to fight against Babylon, but they're going to lose. So Babylon then is going to conquer Assyria, and Babylon then dominates that area for 70 years. So from 609 BC to 539 to the fall of Babylon is 70 years. Now, Daniel's taken captive 2 years after the death of Josiah, right? So in there, you're going to have Jehoahaz for 3 months, and then you're going to have Jehoiakim. And, okay, Angela's note there, which I'll look at. And then, so that's going to be the arrival of the second angel. So we'd have to look at that a little bit more in detail. Now we know that if Daniel's the second angel's message, and Ezekiel is also then the second angel's message, but it's going to be his beginning when he's taken captive here that I have as the formalization of the message. Now, in some ways, we probably should have 592 BC, because I've thought about it a bit, instead of 597. But it's just kind of Ezekiel's ministry. Now, he's going to be taken captive, and so is Jehoiachin. But the message isn't formalized until Ezekiel has his first vision, in which he's then going to predict the siege. So I don't know if I should change that, but we'll discuss that as well. But definitely the predicted siege, to me, that would be the empowerment of the second angel, because you have the siege. It's ultimately predicting the destruction of Jerusalem, particularly the temple. That's being pointed to on the 10th day of the 5th month. So that's the arrival of the third angel in this line. Now, again, when we draw a line like this, we know that this is a fractal of some larger line. So we would just recognize that we're zoomed into some larger line, whatever that line is, whatever that waymark is, in order to produce this line. And so we haven't decided what that is. We don't know exactly what magnification we're looking at. Okay, now I just want to quickly look at, so Angela put a comment about 561 BC when Jehoiachin is released, as he's going to be in captivity for 36 years. So we know that he's taken captive in 597. But you're going to look at this, Angela. You're going to reach to 45 years to 516, the temple's dedication. The temple dedication is in 515. So the decree of Darius is the summer of 516. So if you're going to look at that, it would be 46 years, Angela.
Okay, thanks.
Right. So now often when you see dates about the temple, like people will always say 516 because it's in the 6th year of Darius, and the 6th year of Darius is in 516. But the 6th year of Darius goes from the spring of 516 to the spring of 515. And since the dedication happens in the 3rd day of the 12th month, which happens to be March 12th in 515 BC, it's technically 515, right, on our calendar. But it is in the Jewish year, right, if we're going spring to spring, 516. But yes, we would then have 46 years. So it looks a little bit odd, I guess, in a way. But once you put it together, you can see there's the 70 years from 586 to 516 when the decree goes forth, right? So the decree of Darius is in the summer of 516, and then you get another 6 months or whatever until the temple is actually completed and dedicated. So it ends up being like 70 years and 6 months, let's say, or maybe 7 months. Depends exactly when that decree occurred. We don't know exactly which month. We just know it's in the summer. So I think it's probably more like 7 months. So 70 years and 7 months from the decree to the dedication. So yeah, there's a lot of structure in this whole history, even when you start looking at Ezekiel's visions and the different spans of time. Stephen has analyzed some of that, the number of days between different events, different visions. They all start to become significant as far as a structure. So it shows a structure that's not random, is the main thing about some of these spans. You can see that there's this detailed structure. Now, somebody could argue, well, there's just lots of dates, but these structures become quite intricate. So to take them as random would be very unlikely. It's like, there's you change 1 or 2 dates and all of a sudden there's no structure. So that means that they're interdependent in that sense as far as being a structure. Okay, so we have this so far. Any questions about any of this at this point? Because if I was going to change this like to 592, or just say Ezekiel's first vision. So I'm thinking about that.
You're saying okay.
Hey,
What was the 597 again?
Well, that's when Jehoiachin and Ezekiel are taken captive.
Okay. And so you're putting that as first vision. Okay.
Yeah, and the reason is because it's a formalization of the message, right? His captivity doesn't really do anything, but his first vision is going to be predicting the siege.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I guess it does seem more significant.
There's also the very simple fact that his first vision is on July 21st on the 5th day of the 4th month. And in Millerite history, the second angel is formalized at Boston on July 21st on the 5th day of the 4th month.
Interesting.
So to put that there, just to line that up, that seems to me the most logical, to put his first vision there rather than his captivity. Then, of course, the empowerment of that is he has his first vision, he predicts the siege, and then it's going to, in Ezekiel 24, again in the 9th year, in the 10th month, on the 10th day of the month, that's when he's going to say, write this day, the name of this day, even this same day, the king of Babylon set himself against Jerusalem this same day. So it's a doubling, it's the midnight cry, right? It mentions the self same day. That is, that word same day is usually translated as self same day. And it's etzem, which means a bone day, which is an anniversary date. And
self same day is an anniversary date?
Yeah, so the idea is that most people, when they just look at it and they just say, oh, self same day, like it just means that day. But actually in Hebrew, the word for same or self same is the same word for bone. Etzem means a bone. And this relates to how they keep track of a calendar. So a calendar is this little piece of bone with 30 holes in it, and you have a bone peg, and every day you just move that peg to the next hole. When you get to the 29th day, the 29th hole, then you look for the new moon. If you see the new moon that evening, then you put the peg back to the first place. But if you don't see a new moon, you put the peg into the 30th hole, right? And that's how you keep track of the days of the month. So these were how people did it. So the idea of using a bone day as a symbol of an anniversary, either monthly or yearly, is in my paper on the wave sheaf offering, I go through that in detail. I look at every place where the bone day is used and show that it's referring to an anniversary of some sort. Now, the fact that this date here is referred to as a self-same day means that it's an anniversary of some date, or in this sense, a pre-anniversary. That is, the siege begins on the 10th day of the 10th month, and the temple is destroyed on the 10th day of the 5th month. So this is marking the 10th day. So this is something that most people don't really think about. And then when you go to Ezekiel 40, it also says, in the 25th year of our captivity, and Rosh Hashanah, the beginning of the year in the King James, but Rosh Hashanah in the Hebrew, in the 10th day of the month, in the 14th year after the city was smitten, in the self-same day, that is in the bone day, the hand of the Lord was upon me. So what it's saying here is that it's the 10th day of the month, which is of Rosh Hashanah, so it's the 10th day of the 7th month in the new year. But it's the self-same day. That is, it's the same date as when the temple was destroyed, right? So the fact that it's the 10th day is why it's a self-same day. So this is not noticed by anybody. I know no Bible scholars or chronologists or anybody who recognize that self-same day refers to an anniversary date, whether monthly or yearly. So that's the unique view that somehow I noticed. And just because of probably my, I would think the main reason is because God wanted us to see it now, but also just my attention to detail. So
we learned
that,
that. We learned that earlier. I said we learned that earlier in the studies.
Yeah, we went through that earlier in the studies because we went through that. Well, the first time I really noticed the self-same day would be like long time ago, but to actually do it, a thorough examination of it, was in 2022 or 2021, whenever I wrote the paper on the wave sheaf offering. I know it's a few years ago.
I remember going through that.
Yeah. Okay. So anyway, we have this Ezekiel's first vision. It's predicting this coming siege. When the siege comes, it's going to be the empowerment, because it's going to mention self-same day twice. So again, I mean, it's pretty obvious it's the empowerment of the second angel. Now, the question that I have, though, is Daniel being taken captive when we deal with a second angel arriving. Now, Daniel's message is a prophetic message, but he's not proclaiming that message. But Daniel does become a witness of the second angel. Now, why would I say that? What evidences do we have to put Daniel's captivity as the arrival of the second angel? I mean, it's there chronologically in the middle. So, we could just say, well, what other event? I mean, we could have said maybe Ezekiel's and Jehoiachin's captivity is the arrival of the second angel. But I chose to put Daniel's captivity there. So why would I do that? Maybe I'm wrong.
Well, because Babylon was involved, wasn't it?
Okay, so Babylon is involved, right? So now we don't have in this message, this is about the fall of Jerusalem, not the fall of Babylon, right? So Babylon's going to be the instrument that's going to destroy the temple. Okay.
What about Daniel's first vision? Would that be anything significant?
Yeah. So Daniel's first vision being Daniel chapter 7.
Yeah. Okay.
Right. Now, but the thing about Daniel's first vision is it's actually the vision that he fulfills, because here, let's go there. We really need to make this clear, because I don't think it's well understood. So we're going to have the vision of the four beasts, right, in Daniel chapter 7. So that's his first vision. Obviously, the first 6 chapters are mostly narrative, with describing Nebuchadnezzar's, he's going to have his two dreams interpreted. And then, of course, chapter 5 dealing with the fall of Babylon, and chapter 6 just a narrative dealing with Darius the Mede, right? So with Darius in the first year of his reign, with Daniel's praying and then being thrown into the lion's den, right? So there's significance in those narratives and how they're connected, but which we're not going to look at right now. But the first half of Daniel is that, and then the last half of Daniel is 4 successive visions, 7, 8, 9, and then the last vision, 10, 11, and 12 is 3 chapters. Now,
Chapter 2 would be Daniel's first vision, wouldn't it?
No, because that's not Daniel's vision. That's Nebuchadnezzar's dream.
He's interpreting.
He's interpreting the dream.
Daniel's interpreting his dream. So
yeah. So it's Daniel's interpretation, but not his vision. He doesn't have a vision there.
But it does predict the fall of Babylon in Daniel 5, right?
In Daniel 5? Well,
in Daniel 5 predicts it.
In chapter 5, he's just announcing that Babylon is in the process of falling. because really it's the armies are already into the city at the time when Daniel comes and the writing is on the wall. That's why when we say the writing's on the wall, it's like it's a done deal, right? Like there's not really time for repentance there for Belshazzar. The armies are already in the city when Daniel gives his message there.
But in explaining Nebuchadnezzar's vision,
dream,
his dream, yes, doesn't he also predict the fall of Babylon and the successive powers that follow it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he does.
So, all right.
Yeah, but the main point here is that when we're dealing with Daniel's first vision, it is chapter 7, right? And chapter 7 is the vision dealing with the beasts. And if we look at Leviticus 26, right? Leviticus 26, each of these are connected to the prophecies in the book of Daniel. Now, the first prophecy in the book of Daniel is, of course, Nebuchadnezzar's dream, right? So Daniel chapter 2, and that's tied to Daniel chapter 4. Now, why do I say that? Why is Daniel 2 tied to Daniel 4? So Daniel 4 is going to be Nebuchadnezzar's second dream, in which, the 7 times shall pass over you, right?
Right.
So why is that tied to Nebuchadnezzar's first dream? I know you guys don't understand where I'm going, but
isn't this giving Nebuchadnezzar a time to repent?
Okay, yeah. There's obviously he is given a message, right? And he has an opportunity to turn to follow God. And he does in a sense for a bit, but it's not long lasting. And so before his kingship is going to end, for the last 7 years of it, he's going to be insane, right? Now, it's about his pride. So we know that the first of the 7 times is the breaking of the pride of the power. Now, in the context of Israel, that's going to be Manasseh's captivity, right?
Agreed.
Right, so that's 677. But there is an aspect of that relates to Nebuchadnezzar himself, because he becomes a type of what happens to the Jews, right? That is, Manasseh's taken captive, this breaking of the pride of the power, right? He's going to have his affliction, and then he's going to turn to God personally. But they're not going to be reformed by these things. So you have those 70 years after Manasseh's taken captive for reform to happen. That reform is going to fail with the death of Josiah. And then 2 years later, wild beasts are going to rob you of your children, right? That's the second 7 times. So I will also send wild beasts among you, which shall rob you of your children, destroy your cattle, make you few in number, and your highways shall be desolate. Right? So that is Daniel's captivity. And you can see the wild beasts, they're referring to these kingdoms, Babylon, Media, Persia, Greece, and Rome, but the first beast being Babylon, that's when Daniel's taken captive. So we can see Daniel's captivity is the fulfillment of the second 7 times. Now, we also have a story with Daniel where he's thrown into the lion's den, which is interesting as well, because we know that the lion represents Babylon. Now, it's going to be during the time of Darius that he's thrown into the lion's den. Now, why is that? Because we often don't look at that story. We just think of it as like, children, we read it to children about Daniel in the lion's den. But prophetically, why is that in the book of Daniel? And why does it happen at the end, like in the first year of Darius after Babylon has fallen? Right. So Daniel chapter 6, we all know that story. So what is the significance of this story of Daniel in the lion's den and the lions do not eat him? Prophetically, what is this symbolizing? And we got the laws of the Medes and the Persians. Because Daniel is a type, right? Remember, as a prophet, when something happens to him, it's acting out something prophetically, correct? It's not just a story about his fidelity to God.
Yeah, marks, it marks things.
Okay, so the lion represents Babylon. So the king of Media Persia, king of Media particularly, but Darius the Mede, he's a Mede, but he's in charge of Media Persia until his death, and then his nephew Cyrus becomes the king, and Persia becomes the horn that comes up last, but it's larger than the other horn, right? But we have here a beast, a lion, which is Babylon. Babylon is the one that took Daniel captive. At the end, after Babylon has fallen, Daniel's going to be thrown into the lion's den as a symbol of something, and it's going to be the laws of the Medes and the Persians that is going to cause him to be thrown into the lion's den. So what's happening? Any thoughts about it? If the lion represents Babylon, does this represent somewhat Daniel's ministry during the time of Babylon? Or does it represent something else? Now, also about the laws of the Medes and the Persians, what's going to happen later under Xerxes is there's going to be a law made again. Now, some people take these stories in Daniel and they take the story in Esther, and they see a parallel between these stories in Esther and Daniel. And if you're a skeptic, somebody who doesn't believe the Bible is inspired, you see these as sort of literary tropes being recycled in the book of Esther, taken from the book of Daniel. Now, of course, there's a huge problem that often they have here, because if you're a skeptic, you believe that the book of Daniel was written in the 2nd century, after Antiochus Epiphanes. It's pretty clear that the book of Esther is written a lot earlier, even for those who are skeptics. They're not going to have it as being a product of the 2nd century. They're going to recognize that it was written earlier, but still not describing real history, right? So they're going to have it maybe in the 3rd century. But they often say that Esther is copying Daniel, but yet they have Esther written before Daniel. So, and that's usually, different scholars at different times, not the same scholar. But you can see some of the problems that they have with that. But when we look at the story and we see the symbolism, is Daniel in a way typifying what's going to happen under the Medes of the Persians, particularly in the story of Esther? Right? When we studied Esther, we noted some of the similarities of these supposed tropes that show up in the book of Esther that are in the book of Daniel. A law signed, it can't be changed, and then God's people are miraculously delivered. Okay, so Jeremiah was youthful when he was called, perhaps the same age as Josiah. I don't know, Angela. I don't know how old Jeremiah was when he was called. Maybe Stephen has figured it out, but I haven't. And then Nebuchadnezzar begins Daniel 4 by recounting his dream and Daniel interpreting it in Daniel 2. And again, Daniel interprets the king's dream in Daniel 4. And again, Nebuchadnezzar, after his 7 years madness, is delivered and extols the king of heaven. Yeah, so there's definitely this relationship between Daniel 4 and Daniel 2, right? So, and the idea that these are dealing with the pride of power. So this progression of the progressive destruction of four, that is the 4 7 times, is dealt with in the book of Daniel in the symbolic language from Leviticus 26. And we can see that it's being fulfilled literally in relation to what happens to Babylon, but also what happens to Israel. So Nebuchadnezzar is becoming a type of what happened with Manasseh's captivity. So Manasseh's captivity had happened, in 72 years before, or whatever, Nebuchadnezzar's first dream. But it's reflecting upon that event, because it's showing that, even though Babylon's the head of gold, Nebuchadnezzar's the head of gold, his kingdom still won't last forever. That's why he builds the golden image on the plains of Dura, which is much later and a little bit before he goes crazy, right? So can't remember what year Stephen had for that. And then we have in Daniel chapter 4, tying back to Daniel chapter 2, Nebuchadnezzar personally has the 7 times upon him. So that typifies the 2520 for Judah from 677 to 1844. Now, some people in criticizing the 2520, I've had lots of people who try to argue that somehow we get the 2520 from Daniel chapter 4. Now, Jehovah's Witnesses use Daniel chapter 4 for their 2520. Jehovah's Witness prophecy is terrible stuff, because it's just such built on such tenuous arguments, such thin threads of evidence, and ignoring almost everything contrary. But where they started, obviously 607 with the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem in 607, which is obviously not true. I don't know how they ever got the destruction of the temple in 607. I've read lots of Jehovah's Witness literature. It seems it was just a mistake Charles Taze Russell made, and they've never seen fit to correct it. They've tried to bend everything to fit that. But anyway, the point is, we understand that even though it typifies the 2520, we don't get the 2520 from Daniel chapter 4. We're not taking Nebuchadnezzar's personal 2520 and just creating a time prophecy with it. We've never done that. And Miller never did that, right? He would see it's parallel, but he based the 2520 upon Leviticus 26 itself, and so do we. But we do something that Miller didn't quite do. That is, we first take the 2520 for literal Israel. We mark the events, but we recognize that Daniel and Jeremiah and Ezekiel are going to interpret those symbols of Leviticus 26 in a way that it's fulfilled by literal Israel first. So the 2520 for literal Israel is about the Babylonian captivity and the end of it. It's just that Daniel connects us to the 2300 days and the 70 weeks with these 3 decrees, and those decrees then stitch this 220 years to the 2300 days to get the 2520. So there are steps that were missed by Miller and missed by pretty much everybody in the movement as far as how we understand the 2520. Now, once in a while on Facebook, I run into people who still believe the 2520, who are not really part of this movement. That is, they were influenced by the movement in the early years, maybe 15 years ago, 16, 20 years ago, whenever we first had the 2520. Some of them only believe Miller's 2520. That is, they don't recognize hieromancins. There are some who accept both, though not the complete prophetic mirror. They just see there's one for northern Israel, one for Judah. They definitely do not accept the idea that we have that the 2520 is fulfilled by literal Israel first. So hopefully this is helpful as we go through this to kind of see that this is extremely involved, that all of these different threads pull everything together. And so when we look at the line that we have, as far as Daniel being the second angel arriving, which is what we're looking at, Manasseh's captivity is the first 7 times, and Daniel's captivity is the second. Now, we would have Zedekiah's captivity the year the temple is destroyed, which we have the third angel arrives in 586. So obviously his captivity is tied to the destruction of Jerusalem. But his is the fourth 7 times, not the third. So we, in doing this, if we're not putting Ezekiel's captivity or Jehoiachin's captivity as one of the waymarks, we're using this one. This is the first 7 times, right? And Daniel's being the second 7 times being the arrival of the second angel. Then we're going to have this is tied with the fourth 7 times, but we don't have any particular waymark for the formalization because we have the formalization as Ezekiel's first vision. But could we not have this as the increase of knowledge? That is, we have Daniel's captivity. Now, Daniel's captivity is going to have a number of things. We're going to have, in that period of time, we're going to have Nebuchadnezzar's first dream, right? We're going to have Ezekiel's captivity, Jehoiachin's captivity. And so maybe that's part of the increase of light, right? So we have this, because normally we often think of the increase of light as just being in the first angel, but we know that actually light increases all along the line. But when an angel arrives, there still is an increase of light here. Now, sometimes we just say it's a tarrying time, because that's true as well. But during that tarrying time, there's going to be an increase of light during the tarrying, which is going to happen, and that's going to be manifest because there's going to be a formalization of the message. So I still think we would put Daniel's captivity as the arrival of the second angel and Ezekiel's first vision as its formalization and the siege as its empowerment. But, I'm arguing for my position. Anybody have any other ways that we could understand this? If we're going to place these waymarks here, the ones for the first angel, those are pretty clear. I guess the question would be about the arrival of the second, which trying to place that as Daniel's captivity. I still think that's the best one.
Well, coming after it, after the 70 years, the symbol of probationary time is pretty weighty in that situation.
Yeah. So the one thing is a people is being tested. So under the first angel, there's a testing, and then a group is passed by, right?
Correct.
Right. So that they fail that first test. Now, so we can see when Daniel is taken captive. Now we know Jeremiah was there already as a prophet, and Ezekiel's going to show up as a prophet. But Daniel, being this prophet who's not proclaiming a message, so he's not giving a warning message against God's people directly. He's not going to write his book till the end of his life. But he becomes a witness. His captivity becomes a witness against Israel. So it's in the time of Jehoiakim, and it is definitely a warning. And we see that Jeremiah, who is the prophet in Jerusalem, Ezekiel's going to be a prophet in Babylon, but Jeremiah, the prophet in Jerusalem, he's definitely going to discuss that whole issue of the captivity that happened in 607, right? Because the 70 years have already commenced. So we went through that whole thing dealing with the 70 years, right? So we can see that that's still a valid period in the 4th year of Jehoiakim. we have this with Ezekiel. So Ezekiel is going to be the one who ultimately, Ezekiel and Jeremiah, right? Both Jeremiah and Ezekiel address this. Jeremiah, yeah, go on.
Under the second angel empowered, you got 10, 10, and 9. Is that 19 or is that 9?
No, that's the 10th day of the 10th month in the 9th year.
Oh, okay.
That's when the siege begins. Yeah,
right.
So it's January 5th, 587. That's the biblical date, 10th day of the 10th month in the 9th year, right? And then 20 months later, the temple is destroyed on the 10th day of the 5th month in the 11th year of Zedekiah's reign. But yeah, so getting back to, so we got Jeremiah who's prophesying in Jerusalem. He's going to affirm when Daniel's taken captive, in the 4th year, they're going to have this whole thing. This is going to be where, okay, we got the 4th reign, 4th year. I've just got to find the one. I always forget which. Let's see here. Because we're going to have the 4th year of Zedekiah too, which is different. So in the 4th year of Jehoiakim, so Jeremiah 25. So the word of the Lord came to Jeremiah concerning all the people of Judah in the 4th year of Jehoiakim, the son of Josiah. Okay, so that's Jeremiah 25. That was the 1st year of Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon. Right, and that's where it's going to talk about from the 13th year of Josiah to the 23rd year. This day that is 23 years, or the 23 and 20th year, right? So the 23rd year of that he's been a prophet, right? And that's going to be in the 4th year. So we got Jeremiah. In this case, it's going to be, like 606, 605. Doesn't tell us which month. But because it's the first, so we're going to have this in 605, I think is where we place this. This 4th year of Jehoiakim. So the summer of 605. His 5th year is going to begin in the fall. So this is the summer. Nebuchadnezzar is now king. Now, when Jeremiah writes this, he's not writing it contemporaneously, right? He's writing this later. But so when he dates it in the time when Nebuchadnezzar had begun his reign. So that's why he calls it the 1st year. But it's not actually the 1st year of Nebuchadnezzar's reign, because the 1st year of his reign doesn't begin until the spring of 604. But the spring of 604 is no longer the 4th year of Jehoiakim. Okay, so I know that gets confusing for some people, but it just has to do with how these reigns overlap and how they count the 1st year. They don't have a word for an accession year. So they just call that his 1st year. Okay. But the point is, Jeremiah is prophesying in this time and telling them that they need to submit to the king of Babylon, right? So this is the 70 years. So he's talking about the 70 years. It's already commenced. Verse 9, behold, I will send and take all the families of the north, saith the Lord, and Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, my servant, and will bring them against this land. So even though Daniel's captivity has occurred, we still haven't had Jehoiachin's captivity, and we haven't had Zedekiah's captivity. So in the 4th year, after Daniel has been taken captive, and Nebuchadnezzar's dad, Nabopolassar, has died, Nebuchadnezzar is now the king. And in that year that he's going to prophesy about what's going to happen to Jerusalem, and that this is going to be Babylon coming against Jerusalem. And then later it's going to say here, and this whole land shall be a desolation and an astonishment, and these nations shall serve the king of Babylon 70 years. Now that 70 years doesn't begin in 607. This 70 years begins in 609, because the nations are going to serve the king of Babylon until God punishes the king of Babylon. And it shall come to pass when 70 years are accomplished that I will punish the king of Babylon and that nation, saith the Lord, for their iniquity in the land of the Chaldeans, and will make it perpetual desolations. So that happens in 539. So this 70 years is the 70 years for Babylon. When we get to Jeremiah 29, now this one here, it says, now these are the words of the letter that Jeremiah the prophet sent from Jerusalem unto the residue or the remnant of the elders which were carried away captives, and to the priests and to the prophets and to all the people whom Nebuchadnezzar had carried away captive from Jerusalem to Babylon. After that, Jeconiah. So who's Jeconiah? Sometimes called Coniah.
That's Jehoiachin, right?
Yes, Jehoiachin. So after that, Jehoiachin and the queen and the eunuchs and the princes of Judah and Jerusalem and the carpenters and the smiths were departed from Jerusalem. So these people were carried away in 597. So this is after 597 even. So this is a message by the hand of Elasah, son of Shaphan, and Gemara, the son of Hilkiah, whom Zedekiah the king of Judah sent unto Babylon, to Nebuchadnezzar king of Babylon, saying. So we know Zedekiah is now king here. Thus saith the Lord of hosts, the God of Israel, unto all that are carried away captives, whom I have caused to be carried away from Jerusalem unto Babylon, build ye houses and dwell, etc. Right? So you're going to have to stay here. That is in Babylon, right? So when you go to Babylon, you're going to build houses, plant gardens, right? You're going to basically make the best of it, because this city is going to be destroyed. And then, for they prophesy falsely, it talks about the false prophets, right? And now, of course, this is after 28. So 28 is going to be with Hananiah. So we can understand that that's going to be in the 4th year of Zedekiah. So things aren't in order, right? And then it's going to talk in 27 about the beginning of Jehoiakim's reign, when he has this vision about the yokes. And then years later, he's going to act that out when Hananiah comes. So it's a little bit confusing for somebody superficially reading Jeremiah to try to figure out what's happening. But we've put these things in their context. So again, what I'm trying to argue is that from Daniel's captivity, there is this work of Jeremiah, which continues through that whole history. Now, in chapter 28, remember this is in the 4th year of Zedekiah. This is 1 year before Ezekiel begins prophesying. And then in 29, it doesn't tell us exactly which year. It's just saying after Jehoiachin's captivity, that there's these words of the letter that Jeremiah the prophet sent from Jerusalem unto the residue or the remnant of the elders which were carried away captives. Right. And this is after Jehoiachin had been taken captive. Okay. And any thoughts about that? Is if we go back to this chart, I still think I'm arguing that this chart is correct here at this point. As far as I can see, that would make sense for this line. Now, again, we know that this line would be a zoom into some other waymark. Now, normally I would like to know what that waymark is and what line is above this line. So we can't say this is a line dealing with the last 7 kings of Judah, and it has within it the 4 7 times. So is this just the line of the fulfillment of the 4 7 times, but not their end? Is that how we would look at this? This is just the last 7 kings of Judah, its fulfillment. But what line is this? Is this, because we don't have a line above it that we've constructed.
I'm having a question in a different way.
Okay.
Is your formalization of the first angel's message dealing with the 21st year of Josiah, or is it with the call of Jeremiah?
Well, it's both, because in the 21st year of Josiah, the prophecy of Josiah is fulfilled.
Right, I understand.
And 21 becomes the symbol that we have in Daniel's 21 days that he fasts, the 21 years, the periods of 21 years, right? From, Daniel's captivity to the destruction of the temple is 21 years. But yeah, Jeremiah's ministry beginning also becomes important. So both of these are tied to the formalization of a message.
So in tying these two together, Josiah's 21st year and Jeremiah's call, is this a symbol of the situation that occurred in the Millerite time when other Millerite preachers came to support what Miller had been saying?
Okay, so Miller being Jeremiah and Josiah Litch being one of those that come and support Miller.
Right.
Yeah, that could work. Now, of course, we have the formalization of that in 1833 when Miller gets his credentials.
Right.
But we're gonna have Josiah Litch. He's pretty early in there that he comes in, and then the other guy, Himes, Joshua V. Himes, really becomes the guy who does all the publicity, right?
Right. I'm not disagreeing with that.
Yeah. So, but you're just saying the other guys come along, and so that's kind of what is being there. So Josiah representing Josiah Litch and all those others.
So, right. I mean, this way, I mean, we understand that what you pointed out here, that Manasseh's 33rd year, its conversion in 677 is important. Now, last week, while we were addressing that, I copied the prayer of Manasseh so that I could have it in a document to really read through this. And then when you're looking at this with Josiah's 21st year and then Jeremiah, it's not really that clear, that we're looking at the call of Jeremiah.
Yeah. Now, and dealing with Josiah, so we have the fulfillment of Josiah, which is, or Josiah, the prophecy of Josiah from 977, right? So,
right.
But Josiah's Passover becomes an empowerment of that, right? Even though, the fulfillment of the prophecy of Josiah is when he's 21, it's when he's 26 that he has this Passover. We're saying that that's an empowerment of what happened ultimately as far as his reforms. So he's going to have these reforms, which we parallel with Millerite history. Right. So we got Josiah's Passover, then we would parallel with August 11th, 1840.
Okay.
Right? The empowerment of the first angel. And you can see that Josiah's prophecy being fulfilled, and then 5 years later, this Passover, that it ties to Josiah Litch and his prediction that's then fulfilled. Because he's going to make the prediction before, like a year before in 39. And then, a few weeks before, again in 40, where he gives the exact date, August 11th. But we can see the parallel there, right? Like, I think that becomes pretty obvious that this is a solid parallel. You wouldn't, there's nothing contrived here.
No.
Okay. But you can see this makes sense, like what we've done here in comparing this with Millerite history. And then we have that failure. Now, we could look at, what happens in 609. That's going to begin the 70 years for Babylon. And with the death of Josiah, could we kind of mark that as, because we have the first disappointment in Millerite history is April 19th, 1844. But we know there's actually disappointments before that. The one group that falls away prior to the end of Miller's prediction, they're going to hold to March 21st as being the last day of the Jewish year, right? So a month before the first disappointment, the majority of Millerites actually fall away, because the only ones who come to the disappointment on April 19th as their first disappointment are the ones who, because they figure out this date, like months in advance. So they already know that Miller's prediction goes to April 19th. And we're told that that's when the disappointment was. Like when you read in the Millerite writings, they didn't have a disappointment on March 21st. That is, the ones who continued and accepted the second angel's message, their disappointment is on April 19th. But for the ones who did not accept the second angel's message, their disappointment is March 21st, right? That is, many are disappointed before the period actually ends because they're not accepting the new light. Now, some even fall away December 31st, 1843, right? Some fall away in the fall of 1843. People are progressively losing confidence in the message for whatever reason, because they're having these failed predictions in their mind. You know, they would look at, you know, April 19th as a fudge, right? Somebody trying to, you know, just extend the period longer. But they had figured this out quite a bit before. So it's not really, Ellen White would not have been disappointed on March 21st. She's disappointed on April 19th. So those that have accepted this advancing light, so if we look at the second angel, we can look at the disappointment with the death of Josiah, right? And then you're going to have, of course, Jehoahaz there for 3 months, and then Jehoiakim. So when we get to Daniel's captivity, that group has been tested. That, what I'm saying is that reform has failed. Now Daniel is going to be part of this group that's connected with the second angel, right? Because he's going to live through that whole period, all the way up to, we could say, the arrival of the fourth angel. But, you know, we haven't got that far in this line. So that would be another argument for Daniel, that this being the second angel arriving. Does that add to what you were saying, Dwight?
It adds a good bit.
Okay. So how would you sum this up, Dwight? If you're going to sum up Daniel's being the second angel, what would you put as the arguments for it? Because we got this dealing with the first angel, definitely, and the empowerment, its formalization and empowerment. But for Daniel being the second angel,
I'm going to have to think about how I would sum that up.
Yeah, I'm not sure the best way to sum it up. But the only thing I can say is I can't think of anything else that would be the arrival of the second angel.
I don't think that there is something, in this, because we need to be able to recognize what Daniel is doing here. And the majority of this time, from the formalization through to the destruction of the temple, we have Jeremiah prophesying, but we also have several others that were prophesying about that same time to try to turn the tide in Judah, and unfortunately their warnings fell on deaf ears.
Mm-hmm. Now, the one thing I could say is in the test that Daniel and his friends have, there is some symbolism that would relate to far as understanding the message, because they're not going to eat the wrong food.
Right, but you also have Daniel and his friends, so that you have a total of 4.
Yeah.
Where the 3 friends may represent the messages of Revelation 14, and Daniel represents the message of Revelation 18.
Right, the second angel.
Okay?
Right.
So using that alone gives you another kind of a brick to supporting this, with Daniel being the arrival of the second angel's message.
Yeah. And so Daniel has a lot involved in his story, right? So he's got a personal story of him and his friends, the test that they have, the 10 days test. Then they have the test before Nebuchadnezzar at the end of 3 years, which they pass. And during that test, so when they pass that test, then they're going to have the interpretation of the dream of Nebuchadnezzar, his first dream. And then Daniel and his friends are going to have the experience in, the fiery furnace. And then, of course, then you have all of these things dealing with Nebuchadnezzar himself, right? So that of course is going to be later in his reign, but Daniel here is that second angel, right? He's, I wouldn't now. We have Ezekiel. He's also tied to the second angel because he's going to be the formalization of that message.
But the situation here is Daniel being a member of the royal house and Ezekiel being of the priesthood.
Mm-hmm.
You have the total of the leadership that is now prophesying about what's going to happen.
Yeah.
Where this being the antithesis of what we're seeing right now, leadership has ignored the prophecy, and it's the common people that have joined the movement that are being prepared to give a message.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So obviously, first we take this, we put it as a line, we parallel it with Millerite history, but then we also parallel it with our own time, right? That's how we've done these things.
Agreed.
Now, so specifically with our own time, we have different ways in which we do that. We can look at it as something within the movement. Now, we've taken the position, at least I have, that we're no longer in our studies looking at the movement per se, like we were when we were studying Judges or even last year, right? We feel that since January 11th, that the message has moved away from looking at this movement, that's over, that's history. Now, when I think about the situation with Jeff, right? So we're taking a position. So this is the position I have, whether you guys agree with me or not. So I don't think what's happening in the Seventh-day Adventist Church is of any real interest of ours, as far as prophetically the church is not. There's not any relevance in any of their actions prophetically as far as a line is concerned. They've been passed by, right? Now, we can care for people within the church, for individuals, but we're not seeking to reform the church anymore. Jeff was initially seeking to reform the church, right? He was a reformer. His message was to the Seventh-day Adventist Church and to its members, so that he wasn't looking at, things the way that he looks at it now. He was just like all of us Adventists in the 90s who were following Adventism. We're looking for the Sunday law. We're seeking to reform Adventism. We're part of the church. Jeff was no different, right? He's just an Adventist. Now, of course, after 9/11, things begin to change, right? So the movement changes because the church has passed by, and we have this message, and it culminates in the July 18, 2020 prediction, which fails. And so Jeff represents that first angel in that line. The second angel, he accepts the message for a time, but like Miller, he ends up rejecting it ultimately. Now, there are people who are trying to follow Jeff, and I cannot understand how they can do that. Not because I love Jeff. Don't get me wrong, but we know prophetically he cannot be, that we're not to be having any man as our leader. Christ is our leader. We're supposed to be following Christ. People keep wanting to follow people, and that's never going to finish the work. Until Christ is our leader and we take up the work with Christ organizing that work at the top, that all the different individuals that he's leading, then that work can be accomplished. So we've taken that position. So we've taken a position regarding the church, and we've taken a position regarding Jeff. So we're in an area of a line that's sort of, for some people, a little bit scary, because we are Seventh-day Adventists, but we're not operating with the church. We're not functioning within the church, trying to change the church. And we're not any longer trying to change the leadership of FFA. Just as the Millerites, after 1844, they divide into these groups, and you have James and Ellen White's group. And initially, they're giving messages to Adventists, right? People who were Millerites. That's their message. And they repeat the messages that were given during the Millerite period, right? That's the first thing they do with Present Truth, is it's republishing those messages, showing that they're correct. We did the same thing. But then they end up in a position where now they're no longer seeking to reach the Millerite Adventists, and that new work begins. And so I argue that that's where we're at. And it's a difficult position to be in because it requires faith and trust that God is working on hearts all around the world to accomplish a work that we're not in charge of. We're only in charge of ourselves and our own understanding. We can share it on the internet, but we may not know who these other people are that God is leading. We may not even know or fully understand the message particularly that they're giving. It would be different than what we're giving. That is, I can't imagine that there's another group on this earth that is finding exactly the same details and dates, because these details and dates apply to us. And I'm not even sure that they're doing specifically this chronological work. There might be some who are doing some work on chronology. But this, what we're doing is it's unique. It's the part that we've been given to do. Now, I do believe that there is a role for it at some point. I'm not sure how that's going to happen, but it's going to be evident that God has taken the work into his own hands, that this is not something that we don't have to organize the work and try to create a worldwide work, which Jeff is trying to do. And so he's taking the role that the first day Adventists took, right? Jeff's actually
pretty much
like a first day Adventist. He's rejecting the light that went before. He holds on to a few little things here and there, but basically misses the whole point and hasn't learned from his mistakes. So, we just have Christ now. That's all we have. I mean, we could say we have each other, which it's nice that, I'm not just, talking to myself, that I have other people to talk to, but we're pretty much alone, right? We don't know what God is doing, other than we can have confidence that he is doing something. So anyway, I think, however we're going to look at this line, I don't know what more we can do with it, and how we're going to proceed, like tomorrow or the rest of the studies, or how we're going to tie up the rest of this. But we have the chronology pretty solid. I don't see anything about the chronology itself. Whether we, need to go through Ezekiel's chronology again, I don't think that we need to do that. But this was, the study of 2 Kings, whether we move into some other line of study. So just a couple of things. We only got like a minute left now. So we need to think about this exactly because we've really covered 2 Chronicles along when we studied this. The next book that we would study would be the book of Ezra. Now, we have never studied the book of Ezra, at least as a book specifically. Now, I have, and I've presented studies on Ezra, and we've studied parts of it, right, as a group. But Ezra and Nehemiah we've looked at too. So we looked at this back in 2022, 2023, but not the complete just book of Ezra. So, that would be the next logical place that we would progress through. But as we're going through these lines, this chronology, the book of Ezra is going to give us the decrees and tie this into another line. So I don't know. And then, of course, we have on Sabbath, we have to think about what we're going to do for the 10 o'clock spot. Okay, so those are things to think about. But we'll come back to this tomorrow and then see where we go from there. Any final thoughts? Okay, let's close with prayer. Dear Father in heaven, thank you for the time that we have had again here this morning, and for each person. We pray that you can bless them. Bless our day this week, our personal studies and the studies that we do together. We again lift one another in prayer. The struggles and trials we face. Help us to trust in you in spite of what we see or feel. Let it help us to know, Lord, that you are there, that we can feel your hand upon our shoulders, and that we can hear your voice guiding our steps. Bring us together again to study these things is our prayer in Jesus' name. Amen.